David Seymour.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise on behalf of the ACT Party in support of this bill, although I have to say somewhat regrettably. If there was a bit more talent on the other side of the House, Mr Speaker, I would probably cross the floor and join them, but sadly that is not the case right now. So I'm voting for this bill because it's a budget measure, but let's be very clear that it is another public policy abomination. And, Mr Speaker, if you want to analyse a policy, here's 3 questions you might ask. What is the intent of the policy? What's it supposed to do? Will it be effective? And what evidence do we have that it might be effective? And what might be the unintended consequences of the policy? Well, the intention of the policy is to stop other people smoking. Mr Speaker, it's not a case of alleviating harm done by one citizen to another, because smoking, by and large, harms only the person affected who does it. Mr Speaker, this policy is about we are trying to stop other people doing something that they would like to do because we don't like it. Mr Speaker, the objective is to reduce the number of people smoking. And we might ask ourselves, will it be effective? Well, if we pick up the regulatory impact statement, the evidence is, supposedly, that every 10% increase in the price of cigarettes will lead to a 2.5% decrease in the number of people who smoke. And one might just ask themselves, how effective has this policy been for the last 5 years? Because we've actually been raising the tax on tobacco 10% every one of the last 5 years. So did we get a 2.5% reduction in smoking for every one of the last 5 years? No, we did not. Mr Speaker, 5 years ago the rate was 16.3%. It is now 15.0%. If we'd had a 2.5% reduction in smoking for every 10% increase, it would now be around about 14%. So it hasn't worked even by the standards that the regulatory impact statement sets out. So it will not be effective at achieving its goal. But what about the third question, Mr Speaker? What about the side effects? Well, the biggest side effect, Mr Speaker, is that we now take an additional $500 million a year in excise tax, and I can understand why the Minister of Finance doesn't mind this policy so much, and we take it overwhelmingly from the poorest people in New Zealand. You're 3.38 times more likely to be from the poorest decile of New Zealanders than the highest decile of income amongst New Zealanders if you are a smoker. So, Mr Speaker, we are taking $500 million or $2,600 from the average smoker who smokes 10.6 cigarettes a day. So that's one of the unintended consequences of this bill and of the tax to date. When we introduce this bill, Mr Speaker, when it becomes a law, the tax will go up another $1,200. So that's $3,800 out of some of the poorest households in New Zealand to achieve a piddling reduction in smoking rates that is lower than the regulatory impact statement accompanying the bill predicted. Mr Speaker, what a disaster. But what about some of the other unintended consequences? Well, Mr Speaker, a brick of 10 packets of cigarettes will now be worth over $300 at the ends of this policy. And how much more worthwhile is it going to be for people to steal, perhaps in an aggravated fashion, a brick of cigarettes worth $300? So go and tell the petrol station owners, go and tell the dairy owners, every one of those bricks is worth $300, and there is going to be people getting hurt, because inevitably when you drive something underground you create a black market. And if you doubt that, go and ask the people in central Canada, go and ask the people in Australia. That is what you do when you have an excessive excise tax. You create a black market. So in summary, Mr Speaker, this is a public policy with no justification, with shonky regulatory impact statement, a policy that has not achieved what it is supposed to achieve demonstrably over the last 5 years. This is a policy that will have unintended consequences, such as impoverishing the people in New Zealand who need it most by an additional $1,200 a year by 2020. The minister sits there, he knows it's a joke, he can't justify his policy, but he's had to do it for a coalition deal, which is much the same reason as I'm voting for it, and the only one I can assure you, Mr Speaker.